I'm here today with Stacey Chomiak. Stacey is the author of a new book titled Still Stace, My Gay Christian Coming of Age Story, published by Beaming Books. In this young adult illustrated memoir, Stacey tells the true story of her teenage and young adult years of heartbreak, family conflict, trying to become ex-gay, wrestling with her faith, and finding love. Stacey is a children's book illustrator and artist in the animation industry who launched a career working on the beloved series My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. Stacey loves to advocate and use her artistic talents for the LGBTQ plus community, and she lives with her family on the west coast of Canada. You can learn more about Stacey at staceychomiak.com, which is STACEYCHOMIAK.com. So Stacey, congratulations on your new book, and thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here and chat with you for sure. Happy to be here.
So I'd love to hear more about your background, in particular all the illustration and animation work that you do outside of books.
Yes. Yeah. I've been working in animation since 2011. And so I've worked on sort of various productions. I think they've pretty much all been preschool, young age children's animated productions. So like My Little Pony, Littlest Pet Shop, Transformers, more recently like Rhyme Time Town, a lot of things for Netflix and DreamWorks. And currently the last few productions, I'm working still with DreamWorks, and it's just stuff there's so much streaming content that's needed, especially with everyone being at home and everyone, needing to have new things for their kids. So right now I'm actually art directing a series of shorts for DreamWorks through the studio I work for out of Vancouver. So there's always a lot to learn, and there's always new fun productions going on. So it's an exciting industry to work in for sure.
That's gotta be. And imagine, working on some of these things that you're describing and doing, the artwork and animation, things like that for that. It's just gotta be so much fun.
Yeah, sometimes it's kind of silly to get paid to paint and draw cartoons, but it's I'm glad I chose it because it's a nice way to pay the mortgage for sure.
I think there are a lot of people that think that you have a dream job.
Well, I guess, yes, maybe on paper for sure. I think I think the challenging thing with that is being an artist, 9 to 5, and being creative within those hours, and making sure that, you make big clients like DreamWorks happy, and, you have to sort of do that every single day, and finding the time to sort of keep up your own inspiration outside of those hours. And, that's, I think, what's been the most challenging, because if you're not feeling inspired as an artist, it's really difficult to put that into your work. So I think that's probably the most difficult thing about it, is when you're just not feeling it, and you gotta do the deadlines for the client for sure.
Sure. So before we get into your new book, what other things have you done relative to books?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. Books are fairly new for me. I've wanted to get into them for a while. I did a few years ago help like a friend with a self-published book, sort of in the progressive Christianity realm as well. It's called Downside Up. And the author is Peter Walker, and he did sort of, it was almost like a children's book for adults, and talking about like kind of Jesus's view on things. And so I did illustrate that. I think that was back in 2014, I think. But I sort of just, animation keeps me busy, and I have my own things I do for clients on the side, and like illustrations and things, commissions. And then in 2019, I did acquire an agent. And then soon after that, got contacted by Beaming Books through my agent, and said they had a manuscript called Rainbow Boy that they had acquired, and they were looking specifically for an LGBTQ illustrator to illustrate it. So I just love the idea, and so I was really happy to jump on board for that project. So that published in January 2021.
Cool. So let's talk about your new book. Again, the title is Still Stace, My Gay Christian Coming of Age Story. So how did that end up happening? What motivated you to write that book?
Yeah, that's a big question. It's all in the book. Here I have one of many copies, but growing up in the evangelical Christian space, and my family was really conservative, and I didn't really struggle with much. Was a really good kid. And then in my teens, when I did start struggling with my sexuality, it really, really confused me. And it really, really sort of pulled me out of that world that I only ever knew one thing about. I only ever knew about Jesus and God and these Christian people, these heteronormative Christian people. And all these feelings that I had just didn't fit. And I had so much shame about that because there was nobody that, I could really talk to. And at the time it was like pre-internet and, there was no such thing as a gay Christian that I knew of. There was no talk about it. And if there was any talk about it, it was really like hush, hush whispers and, and eventually, talking about ex-gay ministries. That was sort of the extent of what Christians would talk about with that. So I struggled for a long time, about 13 years, sort of wrestling with, what should I do? How can I make sense of this? Because who I was a Christian, and I hate to use that label, but my faith was really important to me, and my relationship with Jesus and God was important to me. So that I couldn't really take out of myself. But then I had these feelings that I also couldn't reconcile. And everyone was telling me that like Jesus hates that and hates homosexuals. And so you can't have both. And I just really internalized all those messages. And I just continued just to have just shame and sort of go in these cycles of sort of self-hate. And so eventually, after a really long winding road for 13 years, when I made peace with it and got married, and after we had our kids, I started feeling like I think I should, tell my story, because maybe there's somebody out there that doesn't have someone else to look to, because there's definitely more and more gay Christians out there now, but I still think there's a need for gay Christian voices in the Christian communities. So that sort of was a nutshell sort of reason why I felt compelled to do my own story. But I never ever thought it would be this. This is kind of a shock still to me. But that's sort of where the motivation came from.
Well, especially in the young adult space, there's, I got to believe, still a real need for this because, even in today's world, a lot of kids are struggling to figure out their identity.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was kind of part of the working with Naomi, that my editor, and us sort of realizing that we should definitely target it to the teen audience because, there's not a lot of stories. There's a lot more LGBT stories, but especially with the faith aspect. And if there are any with the faith aspect, often they end with like, I had to leave the church. I had to cut off my faith. It just didn't fit. It was too hurtful. And for me, it was hard for sure, but I was able to reconcile and make peace with both and have a quote unquote happy ending. I mean, everybody's life is still an ongoing, walk, but at least I was able to merge those two things and realize that that was something that God created in me. And that's what I believe. So I think having more hopeful stories with merging both of those identities is really what is really important to me for sure.
So did you find it difficult to write the book, or was it kind of easy to finally kind of get this, out in the open or off your shoulders, or written down, however you want to say it?
Yeah, it was hard and cathartic and heartbreaking and beautiful and all of the things. I think I did not set out to share as much as I did. I definitely wanted to initially just have the Coles Notes of my journey, but as things developed over time and with my agent and then with getting the book deal and editors sort of pulling at strings and saying like, this is an important thing we should talk about, and how do you feel about that? So once I felt comfortable to share more and more, it was definitely a process of me sort of checking in with myself and being like, do I feel like this is something that someone else can benefit from me sharing? There's definitely things I didn't share because I didn't feel they were necessary or I didn't feel safe to do so. But I feel like I shared a lot of things that are representative of a lot of queer people's journeys, the difficulties with their families, the self-hate with themselves, the tumultuous relationships. I mean, these are all really important and sort of relatable things. And just accepting yourself, even if you're not gay, accepting yourself as a fully beloved human being is just, something that's really hard for a lot of us to do. So yeah, it was definitely a journey for me to do that, to write it, and then also to draw everything was really challenging, actually, for sure.
Well, I mean, several of my, other friends from the LGBT community have had similar kinds of, situations, particularly around their family in many cases, or kind of
Yeah.
the previous religious environment.
Yeah.
So, has your family come to grips with what you're doing, or, do you think they're going to read your book, or have they, or how does that play out?
Yeah. How does it play out? I mean, it's only been out, I guess, well, almost coming up in a month now, or a couple of months. Time is strange. Sorry, December 14th. But yeah, it's an ongoing conversation. I didn't really share with my parents, at least, that I was working on the book until I announced that it was coming out, because I didn't want to, invite any sort of conversation or editing or anything, because that's, I didn't write it for them. I think it was difficult for me to sort of reconcile that they'll probably be hurt by some things I had to share. But at the end of the day, I feel like I needed to share that, and I felt like God opened the door for me to do that. And so I'm writing it for, the people that need it. And hopefully we can walk on our own journey together and figure out what that means for us in our relationship. My dad, I just recently heard this week that he is reading it, which is interesting. So I'm sure we'll have a conversation about that. I don't think my mom will read it, and that's not really surprising to me, and that's totally her choice. And then I have some extended family that I have heard nothing from. So, I think in a lot of people's families, like, silence is quite loud, and, that's not surprising, but I think I have allowed myself, and will try to continue to deal with the grief that comes up from that, because, it's hard. You want to be seen. Everybody just wants to be seen, and especially by ideally your family. And when you don't see that and you don't feel that, it's a tough thing to forge ahead with. But I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share this, and for the messages from people that I've gotten, and the connections I've made. And so I think I'll use that as my fuel to kind of keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people, younger people, that are going to be helped by this. So that's incredibly important.
I hope so. Yeah.
So, being an illustrator, did you kind of think of the book in pictures first, or in text first?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I did. I don't have my sketchbook here, but I did think of it in pictures first. I did a presentation recently where I did like a PowerPoint, and I shared the first sketch. It's like a really scrawled sketch of, I was commuting into Vancouver for work, and I just drew myself like in a pew, sort of like with an imagined spotlight on myself, just feeling like out of place and wondering, how am I going to do this? And so it kind of all evolved from that. I did like little storyboards of sort of these main beats of things that I thought would be helpful to share. And then when things evolved, then sort of we switched over to doing the manuscript. And so I love writing. And I guess now I can call myself a writer now that it's published. I guess I'm allowed to. And I hope to do more writing, but I definitely am, I would say, an artist first. So it was hard in that I put everything of myself into the manuscript, and then forgetting that I would then have to put everything of myself again into the illustrations, and sort of channel, all those feelings and the vulnerabilities, and just the mindset and the pain of a lot of those moments into hopefully connecting with people. And I tried to do that, but it was pretty tiring for sure. But looking back now, I'm so grateful that I was at least tried to go there, because I think it comes through a little bit.
Cool. That's cool. So you mentioned, earlier that there were some things you left out of the book, right? Which I think every author, ends up having to scale down the size of their book and take things out that they really don't want to.
It's true.
So in your case, are there things like that you're really sad about that you couldn't include?
Yeah, I mean, there's things that I chose not to even write in the first place. But then there's things that I did write and I actually loved that we trimmed just because it didn't really make sense. There were a couple chapters that we had at the beginning of the book where I was at camp really young and sort of had an interaction with my mom, and it would help to inform sort of our relationship. And then there was like a scene of me in chapel, and I really loved that. And then there was the chapter after that where I sort of had a conversation with a boy that had a crush on me in science class or something. And So it was just like wonderfully awkward. And so I'm sad that that had to be cut, but it made sense to, begin the book where we do. But, you again, learning to trust the editor. And I think she's really smart, and I think it's more concise and all that. If it was up to me, it probably would not be as well received as it is. So you got to trust the editors.
Well, Naomi's wonderful. She's done a ton of great books. So, I'm glad that you built a trust with her.
Yeah. Well, especially when it's like, I felt like I was handing somebody my diaries, and that, because literally I did. I went through my own diaries and then wrote it out. And that was sort of a learning journey for me, because every project up until now that I had worked on was just, I put my art out there, but this is myself in every possible way. So it was pretty scary to sort of be like, okay, why don't you edit my journals? But yeah, I did definitely trust her, and she's great.
So I know a lot of authors feel that the whole process of going through writing a book helps them to grow individually themselves. Did you find any of that yourself?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. Just, learning about the specifics of publishing. This is the first book I've written. So just learning how this all works, and how many rounds of things that it takes, and how many people are involved, and what they're looking for, and what I should be thinking about. And so just a chance for me to sort of grow that skill set was really, really helpful. And it helped me to see that, like, how much I love doing it, and sort of take ownership of that. Like, it's not just something that I can do on the side. Maybe it is something I can do more, that can be actually published. So to have that confidence was really, really neat. And then to just, like, as I merged my art with writing for the first time was such a gift. So I learned so much, and I can't wait to do more projects like that in the future, hopefully.
Cool. So is there any particular favorite part of the book that you want to tell people about?
There's lots of parts I love. I kind of love the opening part at camp, just because I always have an affinity for my time at Bible camp, and so I tried to sort of channel that. So I love that opening part, and then there's just some good, like, angst in with just the struggle of, like, everyone can identify with, like, feeling things for somebody but trying not to, and just that was really fun to sort of get back into that headspace. And then of course just the relief of being able to sort of reconcile yourself, that of course was a beautiful part to share. So yeah, there's lots of, I think it's more sweet because of all the difficulties that I sort of went through to get there. So yeah, hopefully that comes through, hopefully.
So, we mentioned before you do a whole lot of animation work and illustrations and things like. So how does being a queer Christian impact that work, or that aspect of your work?
Yeah, I think it just helps me to see things from a different perspective. Often at work, I have to come out as a Christian most of the time, because there's this community is very artsy, and there's a lot of queer people, and so that's sort of like, oh yeah, no big deal. But then I mentioned, like, oh, I went to church, and like, oh, you go to church, especially as a queer person, it's always quite shocking to people. So I think, I work on the design team of shows, and so I'm not doing the actual animation. I'm designing, like, the characters and the locations and stuff. But I think there's sort of an affinity in a way that, at least myself, the way that I see the world, that helps to inform my work. And sometimes the way that we design things, if there's characters that should look a certain way that, I think a queer person can sort of have more sensibilities for, I think that's helpful too. And hopefully, I have aspirations to maybe do directing one day, and hopefully bring more sort of queer stories into that industry, because there's not enough in that industry represented as well. So, and if writing too, maybe I'll do some writing in that department, who knows, but I'm happy to see, how the way I see the world can sort of be translated into that industry.
So you mentioned church a minute ago. Have you found a good church environment that's, supportive of, your identity?
Yeah. We've been really happy to do that, like, thankfully, which is, it's been a really long, winding journey to find a church that's, that aligns with our beliefs and also accepts us. And, there's often the feedback that I have gotten and a lot of my queer friends have gotten is, it's so difficult to find a Christian church if you have a Christian sort of faith background. And a lot of people say like, oh, well, there's a lot of United churches that are really affirming, and that's beautiful and great. And I totally am excited about that. But if that's not necessarily where my faith aligns with, it seems silly to choose a church based on my sexuality, which is something that straight people do not do. But somehow for the queer community, that seems okay. So I think that's often a challenge that we run into is like realizing that we would prefer to choose a church based on our faith and not our sexuality. And that leaves us with very few options. So thankfully, we do have one. We used to live in Maple Ridge, which is not very far from here. And, I did the typical email a whole bunch of churches and just out myself and say, this is who I am. What's your belief? Because, I, like many queer Christians, I've been really hurt many times by churches that do the bait and switch. And it's really traumatizing. So you sort of want to cut to the chase and say, okay, when you say welcoming, what do you actually mean? Where's the quotations? I need to know, lay it all out, because, it's really, really hard to keep doing that. So yeah, we belong to a beautiful church called Open Door Church in Maple Ridge. And I'm actually serving on the board as well right now. So
wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Good for you. I'm glad you found that.
Thank you. Yeah, us too, for sure.
So if there's any one thing in particular that you'd like people to take away from your book, what would you say that it is?
I hope that people see themselves in my story, regardless of their background of faith or sexuality. I hope that it reminds people to know that they're wholly and fully loved as they are, and that they don't have to change anything about themselves to be loved. And I hope that it helps people to just move forward into their own lives more fully, and that they, will find ways to flourish. Because I think the tragedy of my life then and a lot of people's lives is that we don't know how to fully have a life that is abundant. And if we have that belief in Jesus, if that's what he's wanting for us, I think that's the thing, is how do we grab onto that abundance and walk into it? And so I hope people will sort of get that message from it, even a little bit.
Good. So you alluded to the fact that you want to do some more books. I know the first one just came out. So is it too early to ask anything about what your ideas are, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's so many ideas. I have like a note that I'm always adding to, but I'd love to get back into the sort of the queer kidlit space, and just do some more stories for kids, and then there's some other YA ideas I'm thinking about as well. And there's not like, I don't think there's enough stories about like fertility. We had our kids through IVF, and just sort of the perspective of like queer parents. And so I'd love to do stories that had that in mind. So I think there's a lot of opportunity still for representation. And so I hope that I can get some stuff out there. So publishing, I'm learning, is quite slow. So I'll just keep kicking ideas to my agent and see what happens.
It absolutely is a long trail, a long journey.
Yes.
So
yeah.
I can relate to that. But
for sure.
But anyway, hope the new book goes really well, and hope you're able to come out with some additional ones. That would be just awesome.
Yeah, I hope so too. Yeah, we'll see.
So again, the title of Stacey's first book is Still Stace, My Gay Christian Coming of Age Story. And you can learn more about Stacey and her book at staceychomiak.com. So Stacey, thanks so much for joining us, and congratulations again, and best wishes.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to chat.